First, let's talk about the For Iowa Forevermore, the recent announcement that campaign raised almost $2 billion through funding. So can you just talk a little bit about that, and what does that say about the UI's reliance on private funding and donor funding, that kind of thing?
Well, I think first of all you have to give credit what credit is due. There's a huge team here that has just done a wonderful job out over the last 7 years here on campus. Sally Mason, who launched it, alumni, the Board of Governors for the foundation. So I go on and on and on. This is a real team effort. They not only, the original goal was 1.7 billion. They blew through it. Last March they blew through it. We knew that. But they continued, and I think what it shows, particularly during the period when I joined the campus, and you'll remember that people were kind of asking a lot of questions, I think it actually shows that there's just an enormous support for the university. It's deep and ongoing, and it's actually you can go to each college, because it wasn't just 1.975 or whatever the actual number was. It wasn't just that in total. It was actually each college had a specific goal. They all met their goal. I would say a year and a half ago when I joined the campus, several colleges were behind, but they figured out ways to ramp up. And they also, very importantly, got alumni engaged in ramping up and meeting their goals. There are a couple of colleges that at the last stage I found major benefactors to have matching programs that if, I'll put this amount of money in the pot as long as everybody else stands up and matches it. That worked wonders for several colleges. So it's a broad, important program. Now to your next question, it was implied in your first question, which is what does that say going forward? I think we can have a broader conversation, but I think the simple answer is public research institutions are being, we've had this conversation, funded less and less by the state and federal government, and they need to have their own fiscal bottoms. And I think this is the beginning of that. I think moving forward, we'll be more and more dependent upon philanthropy. I think the nature of the philanthropy is going to change. We came through an era with the floods and other things during this period where we had a lot of infrastructure needs. And I think going forward it's going to be much more programmatic, much more scholarships, much more faculty chair, institutes like we just announced a few months ago, a neuroscience institute. So it'll be more around specific research, teaching, faculty, and student objectives as opposed to let's build a Hansher or let's build whatever building, Boxman and the rest. So it'll change in character.
That actually kind of relates to one of the other questions I have. You touched on, obviously, I'm assuming that you're thinking about the scholarships, the recent announcement that 5 scholarships would be cut because of state funding. And I know there's a difference between donor-funded money and state funding.
Correct.
But you kind of touched on a little bit. Are there any conversations that are happening to maybe that could lead up to students being supported more by
Yes.
the money that's not coming from the state, since that stuff is going away? And can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, let's come all the way back. What happened in terms of these scholarships? And I brought some charts just to inform it. But the simple story is we have the lowest tuition in our peer group per student. We have the lowest state appropriations per student among our peer group. We have the lowest administrative overhead among our peer group. And I can keep going. I think you're beginning to get the picture. And so when you come in and we're allowed to have a 2% increase in tuition, almost every penny of that went back to the state with this de-appropriation. And I don't think in my wildest dreams I would have ever thought that the cuts would have been so significant. I mean, they took it, first whack was $8 million, and now this past week they took another 1.2. When you're at the stage we're at and you take that $9.2 million out, we have to actually, and it's not like it's out one time. It's not just 9.2, it's every year going forward. And we're back to 2014 sort of funding levels here. So we had to make some very significant changes. And we tried to do it, I think all know that we're way behind in faculty salaries. We've had 1 year so we got to continue that. We've got to continue a number of student counseling issues that we've committed to. We've got diversity initiatives we've committed. So anywhere you go around the horn, you've got to find what is the appropriate place in the long term. So we ended up realizing that since 2014, we've put into the system a set of scholarships that were not need or merit based. And so we actually went in and said we need to take those out. And all of us feel terrible about that, but it's the right thing to do. We have to do something. And that's what we chose. And I think it was like with a surgical knife, we found the place that anything we did was going to be painful, but we found something that actually would be the least painful. And I've talked to some of the families, and they don't agree that it's painless. It's not. So then, could we replace those? Of course. We raised in this last campaign a number of specific dollars for scholarships. Should we do more of it? Absolutely, we should do more of it. We actually spend every dollar that we get for scholarships, against scholarships. There is also a misconception, which is that we can move money in the foundation around any way we would like to. I don't know anybody who gives, very few give money into general funds and let the president or somebody else allocate, but 99% of our money is going up against this building, this college, this something. And it's called donor intent. And if we start moving money around, independent of how the donors have intended us, directed us to give their money, it's dangerous. So we're using everything we can exactly as we should. Could we raise more? Of course, and we will.
Do you think there'll be any kind of push towards encouraging donors to give to that general area instead of specifics or anything like that, or is that possible?
Well, when you say general, I always get nervous when it's too general. Mm-hmm. So might we actually create a fund for Iowans, for example, or Iowan students, or might we create a fund for scholarships for Iowa's business students or medical students? Or I think when you start doing that, yes, absolutely. Or it could be if Michiganders. Yeah. And I know why Iowa is so important, but I think so will we actually put an effort against specific scholarships? Yes. The more targeted it is, I think the better, because then it actually allows us to really fulfill the wishes with more specific intent. I brought these, and there you've got our tuition.
Yeah.
By the way, there's household income in the same states as our peer group. Mm-hmm. So this is our peer group. Mm-hmm. The Board of Regents have asked us to benchmark against these. There's our tuition. Here's household income in the states. And the reason we put this, because some people say, Iowa's, a tough economy. Well, it's not all that tough. I think this is more by choice than it is by the economy. Here is our administrative overhead. Here we are at 6.1% of all of our expenses. Mm-hmm. Our national peer group, which is that set, runs at 7.6 versus our 6.1. Big Ten, which not all the schools in the Big Ten are part of our peer group, mm-hmm. but here's all the Big Ten. They run at 8.4. AAU, this is just the publics. So Harvard, Yale, and the privates are not in this. Yeah. But the publics are running at 8% versus our 6. So that gives you that. Remember I said that by state? So here, I'm not sure I actually said this now that I think about it. This is all the states. Mm-hmm. Over the last 25 years, who has increased per student their revenues, and revenues being defined by state appropriations and tuition. So Delaware looks pretty good. Yeah. They've dramatically increased to the tune of about $770, let's say, per student over that period. Anything on this side of the line is actually negative. Mm-hmm. And you'll see Iowa is the fifth from the bottom, right next to California, and I think we all have seen the problems in California. So that gives you some sense. Yeah. Here is the more than you want to know.
No, it's good.
But this is since 1961 to 2016, the percent of the tax base in Iowa that has gone to higher education in the region institutions starts off at 6.5%. It peaked at 12 point, I can't read it upside down.
6, I think?
12.6, somewhere like 12, let's call it 12.6. And it's been running down to lower than it was over here every year since then. And given the current cuts, which are not on there, we're back to, I don't know, probably back at 6% or less.
Okay.
So that's what we're fighting.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the context of these
Yeah.
surgical
Yeah.
insertion into some of these scholarships.
Yeah.
Had to be made.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So switching subjects a little bit.
Got it.
Okay. So obviously, what we were kind of talking about walking in here is crazy time for everybody, specifically for a lot of international students. And I know you've made some comments on the travel ban and things like that when that was happening. But I was just wondering if you have anything to say to University of Iowa students who may still feel worried or uneasy about things that are happening nationally.
Well, I'm worried and concerned too. I think the simple thing, let me back up. I think there are two clusters of issues. One is the international students that are in those 7 countries, specifically with the travel ban, which is now, I think, being reconfigured in something new, and I have no idea what that looks like. But I think as it was originally configured, I was pretty outspoken, wrote several letters. I think it was not the America I know. I think it was poorly executed, and I personally wouldn't be surprised if it were illegal. I think the Ninth Circuit is kind of way down on the same side. So we have 86 students from those 7 countries here on our campus. I believe 8 of them are undergraduates. The rest are graduate students or postdocs. Some of them are physicians in our hospital. We had 2 sessions, and I'd say about half of them showed up. And I'm just doing that we had a Friday session, then a next Monday session. And I'd say about half of them showed up. And we had people who understood the immigration process. We had attorneys in the room, myself. And I will say every person in the room had a unique story. And I'm glad we did it that way rather than just making these large statements, which we did. But you have to get under it. And everybody had a slightly different story. And so we could now start helping specific individuals. So we could say to one young man who had undergraduate who had a summer job back in the region, and we said, given what we currently see, if you leave for that summer job, you may not be able to come back for your second year. So you're going to stay here this summer. And then we'll give you a job, we'll give you a place to live in the dorm and what have you. So that's one set of people, and I think we'll see how that evolves, but I wanted to make sure they all understood they're welcome here. We'll do all we can to protect them. And I understand I would be fearful too. Then there's the DACA students, and I think that's a very different set. It has some of the same characteristics of uncertainty. And as I've been meeting with those students, just saying, hey, let us help you. And so we have legal aid services. But again, and we don't know who they are. That's the tricky thing, because we don't collect that information at the time that they're admitted. Any students who are thinking about applying here, it's not part of the admissions process, so they're as welcome as anybody else, given the admission standards we have. But just saying here's their status is not even on the form. So we're kind of in a weird, unusual position because we don't have the information. Therefore, they almost need to reach out to us. And then the question becomes, well, would you give the information that you don't have out? That's a weird question. No, we don't have it. So I hope that answered these 2 sets. And then we're going to have to keep working through this. I think who knows what's happening at the state or federal level. And case by case, we're going to have to work this through. But I want everyone to understand, we don't establish immigration policy. We don't enforce it. We're here as educators. Everyone's welcome. I think our attitude is we'll do everything we can to help individuals. And our attitude is the people who are guests in our country are better off when they touch base with our culture and they see the love and support they get from our community. And wherever they go in the world, they become friends.
So you mentioned this with one example of a student.
Yeah.
Are there any talks about potential programs that could actually offer those things for students over the summer and things like that?
Yeah, we actually know who the 8 students that are undergraduate, and so yes, and in fact, we're going to block off, yet to be determined. Our original plan was to block off a dorm, and we'll get them a job, and we'll put them in summer school, okay? That's a nice pattern. And the only issue that I've heard recently is one of the fraternities actually raised their hand and said, hey, we could use a portion of our house, and we'd be glad to have them for the summer. So there are other, so whether it's a dorm or some other, yeah, no, we're absolutely doing that. Similarly, the thing I learned is when I sit with you and you tell me your situation, that you're getting ready to get married and that your fiance is in one of those 7 countries, now we can start trying to figure out, should you go there, should she come here, or he, whatever, right? So everyone is a specific situation, and I think out of 86 students, we can figure out how to deal with them individually. And in some cases, we've said, you're going to stay for another year, postdoc, et cetera. Some decided actually they're ready to, with their new degrees, they're ready to go back. But some have said, I'm ready to go back, but I don't think I can go back because I may not be able to come back here. So fine, we'll help you. Yeah. And yeah, that isn't a broad program. So anybody who thinks that if they've got a need, raise your hand and come forward.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Do we have time for one more question?
Sure.
Okay, great. So this one, obviously, I know that you have extensive knowledge about this because you've made some statements on it, but it's a big issue on campus, collective bargaining.
Yep.
So I was wondering, I know you've made comments previously, very recently about it. I was just wondering if you could just reiterate them here, kind of your stance on the student reaction and what's going on with that.
Well, I think there's been a narrative that's tried to emerge that we don't support graduate students. Graduate students are critical. I mean, you can't keep doing what we're doing, without them as students. There's not an AAU institution, period, that doesn't have a really high regard for graduate students and the graduate students are really impactful to their work, teaching, and research. So we'll do everything we possibly can to continue supporting our graduate students, period. Next, then, we get into the specifics of the collective bargaining agreement, and then we get into how the state has changed the dynamics for how that's negotiated. And I'd just say a couple things. I mean, at one point, there were a lot of people saying I was avoiding those conversations. Well, those conversations need to be at the negotiation table. There are a lot of students trying to come to my office or sitting around my office or trying to. I'm actually not a party to those negotiations. They're with the Board of Regents. And we need, as administration, to be quite careful that we don't disrupt those negotiations or tamper with them or we're in a very dangerous zone. So every time I met with students and they say, we want to talk to you about this, I said, no, the time for conversation is go back to the negotiating table. They're a little bit in that mode right now. As I understand it, they were made an offer on wages and they haven't responded. And that's fine, that's up to them, but I can't make any impact. Then there are the benefits. The benefit package, we've actually, John Keller and the Dean of the Graduate College and Josh Schoenfeld, the President of the Graduate and Professional Student Association, wrote a note last Monday saying, here are the benefits. We've actually grandfathered the existing health benefits out for another 18 months. I think ultimately we want to put those students in our own pool because they have better benefits and better economics, but we'll cross that 18 months from now. Secondly, we've actually increased the fees reimbursement. It was 25%, I think we're now at 50%. I'm also hearing narrative like we're doing something around holidays and no. Christmas is still Christmas. We still have July 4th. I don't know where all that's coming from. There's a narrative, I don't know, maybe fear-mongering or something that's going on. It's just not true. Very important. We'll continue.